WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. We Should Know is on there. I want to thank you for your comments from last week. Also, your emails to us at weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. Had a lot of conversation about Representative Dr. Larry Bell was with us, and we talked about some of the issues facing society today and what the legislature had enacted, or maybe in his opinion could have enacted that didn't happen. Today we're switching gears. We want to talk about some things that probably is affecting millions of people. They might not realize it, but it gradually starts happening. And we have as our guest Dr. Meredith Hill. Dr. Hill, thank you for being with us. And I say that with some sense of reservation when I put doctor before it, because I've known you from tiny baby. I've known you basically all your life.
Right.
Close family friend, kind of extended family. And you decided at some point in time, after graduating from Harold's Christian Academy, after going to the North Carolina State University and getting a degree in linguistics, you decided, well, I'm going to go on to a place called, what is that place, UNC Chapel Hill down the road there? So we won't get too loud. But anyway, that was kind of interesting because you now are a doctorate audiologist, and I want to ask you, what kind of intrigued you about ending up in that field?
I get that question all the time.
You got to find out, because it's one of those things that typically you don't find a person all of a sudden just boom. You got to have a special reason for
Right. It's a little more obscure of a career path, but honestly, I started out thinking that I wanted to go into education. My mother was an educator for 35 plus years. And she said, think long and hard about that. Yeah. And so I did, and I explored some other options. I actually got more into speech-language pathology. And so I entered into NC State thinking that was going to be the route. I was going to be a speech therapist, a lot like teaching, but with just a different focus. As I got into those courses, I began to see it just wasn't a good fit for me personally. And speech and hearing are so closely tied together that I couldn't help but stumble upon some of the audiology courses and coursework. And as I did that, I realized this is it. This is for me. The audiology portion of the coursework includes more of a diagnosis and a treatment, and I like that aspect of it. So I accepted the fact that I was going to be doing a lot of school, and I did. I did 8 years after graduating from high school. So the 4 years at NC State and then the 4 more years at UNC got me to where I am. So.
Well, it's interesting, and I noticed you were in private practice for a while, and then you decided to go more into corporate world as a research scientist to some degree. What was that transition? Was it more that you felt your contribution was there as it relates to research and innovative kinds of things? Kind of tell us what happened when you made that move.
Sure. So I was fortunate enough to be in a private practice setting where I got to see all patient types, ages. But after a few years of that, I had a good foundation, and I wanted to focus a little more on a specialized area of audiology, and the cochlear implant world is quite the specialty. So I went into what we call the industry side of audiology and joined one of only 3 cochlear implant companies in the United States. So that was because I had developed in those few years in the private practice a love of my cochlear implant patients and the cochlear implant technology, and I could foresee that technology was only going to grow. So I wanted to be a part of that.
Well, I think it's interesting, and you mentioned cochlear implant. We're going to talk a bit more in detail about that later on. I want to kind of give people at least somewhat of an overview. We do have some concerns, and I guess research is revealing, according to the Hearing Association of America, talks about 20% of Americans, 48 million people, report some degree of loss of hearing. And a lot of that, a considerable amount of that, starts around age 65, which is age-related. I can relate to some of that. The other thing that was interesting to me is that hearing loss, I did not know this, but hearing loss is a major public health issue and 3rd most common physical condition after arthritis and heart disease.
Right.
So you're really in a field that not only is there a large swath of people there, but you're also in a field that as folks continue to age, it's only going to grow tremendously. Right. So for whatever those reasons were that you decided to get in this field, obviously you're in one that's going to grow.
Job security.
Absolutely, job security. So let's talk about it then. Let's talk about when somebody says, well, what is hearing loss? And of those five senses, hearing being very critically important, why is that often the one that's put on kind of the back burner? If it's this visual, automatically, you're going to see an eye doctor, something's wrong with my eyes or what have you.
Right.
Or even if it's taste or whatever it may be, you deal with that. But for some reason, folks tend to put that off.
I think it has a lot to do with the fact that for many people the hearing loss is progressive in nature. So it's not something that they just wake up with one day and they can't hear and therefore they can't function with that sense gone. As it steadily declines, maybe they start to notice it more and more, but they can still function. They can compensate. A lot of folks with hearing loss are very good at compensating, whether that's to read lips or whether that's to avoid situations altogether. They can get around not being able to hear as well. So for a lot of people, the hearing loss doesn't actually impact what they hear, but more how they understand what they hear. So as long as they still feel safe and like they can live and function safely, then they probably push that hearing loss to the back burner. Another issue, I believe, is the stigma that comes along with having hearing loss and the treatment options for hearing loss. So depending on your type of hearing loss, most people can only treat it with a hearing aid or a cochlear implant. And those are visible treatment options that a lot of folks just aren't willing to accept. They don't want to be seen wearing those options, and they don't want people to think that they're at some sort of disadvantage or have a disability. So I think those factors have a lot to do with why people choose not to pursue an option. In fact, studies have shown that from the time a person even accepts the fact that they have hearing loss until the time that they seek out a treatment option, 7 years passes. So
does it just progressively reach a point that it's so obvious they can't hear that they do have to do something? I mean, it's like either family, friends, or job. Also, there's a direct relationship with income and loss of hearing, and I thought that was rather interesting. And having, in my past history in education, worked with some folks that had some hearing issues, and I think about it, I really didn't give much thought to the financial side.
Right.
Why is that, and why do we see that happening in the workplace?
Unfortunately, it's because the treatment options are so expensive for hearing loss. So the cost of hearing aids can be astronomical. If you're looking at a pair of top-of-the-line hearing aids, you could be spending upwards of $6,000 to $8,000. So unfortunately, most insurance companies see that as an aesthetic solution and not a medical solution. And they provide little to no support for those treatment options. So yes, financial restrictions have a lot to do with why people don't pursue any options. And quite frankly, I think that's a disadvantage, and it's a sad one.
Well, it's almost like a cosmetic issue. I mean, if you go in for surgery for something that's cosmetic related, it's not going to pay. So
that's how
I guess it falls in that same kind of category.
Yeah.
When you've the patients you've seen in your private practice world, did most of those folks, because there's a large number of people that are not just aging hearing issues, but I've read also there's a large number of people that are children that parents often miss the reality that that child might have a hearing impairment. What does parents need to think about as we're talking today, and the folks that are listening to us? I think sometimes maybe 2, 3-year-old children, we think, well, they're just not, what is the word we used to say? You're not minding.
Right.
And all of a sudden, could it be a hearing issue?
It absolutely could be, and that's why over the years, in most of the states, if not all of them now, there are regulations passed for newborn hearing screening. So when a baby is born in a hospital, they are screened, their hearing is screened using kind of an automated system. It's a pass-fail system because, of course, a newborn baby can't respond and give the feedback on a regular hearing test like an adult. But it is a screening process, and if they pass, then that's great. But if they don't, they're required to follow up, and a lot of folks are lost to follow up once they're discharged from the hospital, or that's a busy time in people's lives and it gets pushed to the back burner. So I would definitely encourage parents to make sure that their child receives that newborn hearing screening in the hospital. In fact, whenever I was a student, I did an internship at Duke University Medical Center, and I was responsible for the follow-up screenings on those babies. So we would see a lot of infants that would come back several weeks after being born, and we repeated the screening, and they passed and everything was fine. In a lot of cases, after a child's first born and you do a screening, they've been through a lot. There still may be some things that need to clear up, and the ears may not be clean and clear, and so they may not pass a screening, but then they come back in a few weeks' time and repeat it and pass just fine. But I would tell parents not to forget about that, make sure that that's done, and then in the later stages of development, know what's normal for your child as far as speech and language. If you don't think that they're developing and eliciting language that they should be, it could be because they're not hearing it correctly. They're not hearing it appropriately. So I would keep an eye on that, because the next step of hearing for a child or hearing testing for a child usually isn't until they enter kindergarten. So that's a large span between newborn and kindergarten. That's where the parents really are the advocate for their child.
I think this is the kind of thing that folks probably don't really consider, and oftentimes can easily get washed over. As we continue this discussion today, I want to get into some of the more detailed information about the types of hearing loss, because I know they're very different. And then I want to get into some of the very detailed information, talk a little bit about the company you work for as well. But we're going to go to a break here in just a moment. I don't want to really hit you with the follow-up questions, so we're going to take a break. We'll come back and we'll continue to talk about hearing and the lack thereof. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Dr. Meredith Hill. We're going to break now, but as we go to break, I want to remind everybody to keep all of our law enforcement officers close at hand and at heart as we move forward to what it continues to be somewhat of a turbulent society. Thank an officer. Stay with us. Be tuned.
You're out for an evening on the town. Finally a chance to relax and forget that you left your front door completely unlocked. Fortunately, you just installed a security system from Star Communications. With just your cell phone, you can check on your house, lock it down, light it up, and get back to relaxing.
You forgot to put Buster in his crate.
Unfortunately, we can't help with that. Security and automation from Star Communications. Call today to find out more.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're talking about hearing today on We Should Know. We want to thank you for tuning in. It's a good time if you want to call a friend or have somebody to listen in. And we're coming to you on TV channel 16, Star Communication. And of course, WCLN Radio out of Clinton, North Carolina. And I appreciate those folks that have notified us and listened to us in Duplin County, parts of Wake County, Johnson County, a number of surrounding counties to include Bladen and Cumberland County as well. We appreciate your commentary. Hearing is a part of everything we do. Dr. Meredith Hill is with us. Meredith, again, I opened in your introduction and gave your academic credentials and your background. But again, I've known you for a long time, and I'm very proud of what you've accomplished. And I don't know, there's probably a couple of people even more prouder than I am, and that's a fellow by the name of Gene, and the other one is Kay Boyette. And folks may not know that you grew up in Sampson County, a graduate of Harold's Christian Academy, but you grew up right here in Sampson County, and now you're really in a good position in that you're not only working with new technology and science, but you've got a good grasp and understanding of what hearing and audiology problematic issues may be. So what I want to do is drive this conversation, if I can, more to kind of an understanding of those types of hearing losses, and kind of, I guess, get a little bit beyond the description of what it is, but one of those is conductive hearing loss. And I recall reading something about the ear is kind of like a funnel, and it takes things in and how it's processed. And I was fascinated, as I am with sight, is that the brain has to process that, and it processes that in different ways. And then I think about all the folks we've had on that are musicians and talk about music. This would be a sad situation if all of a sudden that wasn't working properly. So let's talk about conductive and that sensor neural and mixed hearing loss. What is that, and how do you look at that when you're in a diagnostic kind of?
Absolutely. So you've definitely done your homework. Unfortunately, a lot of folks coming in to have their hearing tested haven't. They don't know what they don't know. And so whenever we look at the types of hearing loss, there are several. When you consider the ear and how it works, it is much like a funnel. That's why sometimes to hear better, you see people put their hand up to their ear. That's to only enhance that funnel shape. But God did a good job in designing our ear, and He created it already like a funnel. And I have a little presentation piece here that may help demonstrate that point. So when sound is collected by what we call the outer ear, and that's the part that you see, it is funneled down through the ear canal, and then it hits the eardrum. And just like a musical instrument drum, whenever sound hits that, it vibrates. That vibration sends the signal through the 3 tiniest bones of our body, and they happen to be in our middle ear. That is the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup.
And when we say tiny, how small are we talking?
Tiny.
Microscopic small?
Microscopic, tiny.
Wow.
Yes. But those 3 middle ear bones are essentially the chain between our outer ear and our inner ear. So those middle ear bones have to be moving and moving well to send the vibration from the eardrum on into the inner ear. And the inner ear is what comprises our organ of hearing, the cochlea. And so we'll talk more about the cochlea and how that pertains to the cochlear implant later. But it is a chain that has to work in sync for sound to be sent to the inner ear and then through the auditory nerve or the hearing nerve to the brain. And that was what you were speaking of.
Absolutely, that conductive part. And I also read that oftentimes, and we talked about birth in children, that sometimes folks may not know, but when they go to a doctor like yourself, they will discover that they may have had a genetic kind of thing going on with one part of those pieces that they never knew, and they may be in their 60s.
Right, exactly. So conductive hearing loss is just like what it sounds. The sound waves are not conducting through the pathway. That could be something as simple as a ball of wax keeping the sound, blocking the sound from getting down to the rest of the chain. So it could also be something like a hole in the eardrum. People have had their eardrum rupture, and that messes up the conduction of sound through that middle ear system. Those tiny bones that I talked about, sometimes they can get fused together, and then they do not move, they do not work in the way they're supposed to.
So you don't get the vibration.
So you don't get the sending of the vibration, exactly.
I want to kind of, while you're right where you are now, I want to kind of get this question in too, is because quite often there's this sense, well, I went to quote the doctor, which our GPs, general practitioners, do a wonderful job.
Sure.
And I've had a lot of those folks on the show, Dr. Newton and others, but oftentimes they look in your ear with a light. Are they looking at conductive obstruction primarily? Because when you start talking microscopically, there's no way
to see beyond.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, when they take that otoscope or that light and they look in your ear, they are essentially looking through the ear canal, looking for any irritation or obstruction, like the ball of wax, or some children like to place some foreign objects in their ear canal. So they're looking for that, and also to the eardrum. They should be able to get a good visual as far back as the eardrum, and then beyond that, it's
maybe
difficult.
Any inflammation.
Inflammation, maybe if it looks like it's bulging or has some fluid behind the eardrum, but that's about all you can see with the human eye. So after conductive hearing loss, then you start talking about the more nerve type of hearing loss, and that's the sensory neural hearing loss. And honestly, that's what a lot of individuals are suffering from, those folks that have chosen maybe not to pursue a treatment option, because that references the inner ear and the hair cells of the inner ear that have sustained damage over time. So if you think about the hearing organ, which I've called the cochlea, it's the small snail-shaped organ that's in our inner ear. If you think of that like a piano key, if you were to roll out that snail shape, it goes like a reverse piano key from high pitch to low pitch. So the hair cells that are in that cochlea are responsible for stimulating those different pitches, and that's how we perceive a high-pitched sound from a low-pitched sound.
Those hair cells, when we use those words, not to be confused with the size of a hair follicle, but
Especially
more,
mine.
yeah, but more like a blood cell. We're talking
Tiny.
We're talking super kind of microscopic things, and if you look at that under a microscope, quite frankly, when I saw that, I was like, wow, that just kind of blows you away. So
Right.
when we're looking at that sensory nerve loss, should we automatically assume that's something that happens over time, or could children have also a sensory nerve loss?
So anytime that fluid supply within the cochlea is damaged or obstructed, that hair cell loss or that hair cell death can occur. That can be gradually over time as people have just exposed their hearing nerve and their hearing organ to noise, whether that's concerts or machinery, gunfire, etc. But some things like high temperature in a child when they have a fever, for example, that can kill the supply of the flow of the blood and the fluid to the organ of hearing, and it can damage their hair cells. Sometimes folks get a virus that only attacks their inner ear. So a virus can attack you anywhere and can present in different ways. We've had folks who have suffered from severe viruses that have attacked only their inner ear and thus killed their hair cells. So it can go either way. I would say the more common progression of hearing loss is the exposure over time that damages the hair cells.
I think what's interesting when we look at these kinds of things, and we look at the two that we've talked about here, there's also that area of kind of mixed loss hearing where there's just kind of a combination of things.
Right.
How hard is it to kind of differentiate and diagnose specifically what's going on? And,
Right.
and from what I've heard you say, and in conversations off air in the past, is that it's more than just, you know, can you hear this tone or can you hear this pitch? It's a lot more in-depth examination.
Right, so a mixed hearing loss is just like what it sounds, part conductive and part sensory neural. And those are definitely more rare, but it does take extensive diagnostic testing to figure that out. So you do start out by examining the ear with an otoscope, looking in for any obstructions or anything out of the ordinary. You would continue on with tests that would gauge or test the pressure behind the eardrum, because you want to make sure there's maybe no holes in the eardrum or anything keeping the eardrum from moving as it should. And then you would go on to the hearing portion of the exam, where you do test the hearing of the tones, but also you want to test how a person can hear when you bypass some of these other structures. So there are several steps that you would have to go through to get a thorough examination to see exactly what type and degree of hearing loss a person has.
So it's not like just if a person says, well, I've got hearing loss, and you see a TV commercial and it says, look, here's a tiny little hearing thing we can stick in your ear and we can turn this up and it'll, you know, you can hear a lot better. It kind of explained that busted speaker mentality that we've talked about before.
Maybe or maybe not. It depends on the type of hearing loss the person has. And so that's why they'll want to make sure that they get their hearing fully examined before they pursue any sort of treatment option, regardless of where they get that treatment option. So not everything applies globally if you think you have hearing loss. My hearing loss could be totally different from yours, and therefore your treatment options would be totally different. So people want to make sure that they get thoroughly examined before they go spend any money on anything that may or may not solve their problem. For some of these hearing loss types, like the conductive type, if all you have is some wax that needs to be removed and you've gone and spent hundreds or thousands of dollars on devices, you're going to be kind of disgusted to find out that all it was just having something manually removed. Also, there are surgical options for some of those bones that maybe have been fused together. Those can be a better solution than buying something.
When we come back, I want to talk about some common kinds of things that folks have heard over and over again. Don't stick a Q-tip in your ear. Don't stick a bobby pin or a hairpin in your ear,
Right.
those kinds of things. I want to talk about some of
Sure.
those, cover those areas. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. Call a friend. We're talking about hearing audiology with Dr. Meredith Hill. We'll be back in a moment.
Whether it's video, voice, internet, or cellular, Star Communications connects you to the things you love. It's what we do and have done for over 50 years. Star Communications, your local technology company.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I want to thank you for being with us today. Particularly want to thank those folks today at the radio station that put sounds out each and every day to include music, news reports, and other information. WCLN in Clinton, all those folks that mentioned us, the morning show with Grandpa and the Old Man, and Nolan Z, and of course Wayne Weeks, the Gospel Hour each and every day, the Country Store with Nicole, and also thank Nicole for introducing this show each and every week as well. And Robert Stroud on Saturday afternoon with the Boogie Shoes Radio Network, Tommy DeFly in the afternoon, and it's all about sound. Dr. Hill with the radio. I mean, folks have radios in cars now. We got radios on our phones. You just type in, Mixer, oldies1170.com. You can hear the radio report anywhere in the world. We so depend on sound. One of the things that intrigues me as we talk about these hearing loss kinds of things, and we talked about music a lot on this show with some different artists and folks that have come in. It actually tempers our personality and who we are.
Right.
Because the sound reaches that point in our brain that creates that sense of not only drama, but mellows us out.
Right.
So this is a very serious loss when you start losing that hearing piece.
Absolutely. We see a lot of folks who suffer from depression as associated with their hearing loss for several reasons, whether that's because they have to withdraw from their activities or whether they are a musician, for example, and they can no longer pursue their passion. So some of the treatment options that are able to give them back that lifestyle can really change their lives for the better.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. So if we're looking, and you mentioned obviously some of the treatment losses with conductive hearing, just removing an obstacle or maybe could it be that a person could have some sinus problems going on? Could it be fluid in the inner ear that may be an issue, all of those kinds of things? And in that diagnostic process, how do you go about determining that? What kinds of procedures are involved? And you mentioned a while ago the cost of the equipment, but is the procedures now where typically insurance companies are not paying for the procedures?
Most often, insurance companies would authorize one hearing test per year. So we encourage folks to seek that out, especially if they're beyond the age of 50. So I think that the diagnostic portion is not as intimidating as some of the treatment options. So a general hearing test would include, like what we discussed earlier, taking a look in the ear, maybe doing some pressurized testing of the eardrum to make sure that it's functioning as it should, and then going on to test the actual hearing. And to do that, you're going to test several pitches from low to high pitch, and you're going to find what we call the threshold, or the softest point that a person can just detect that sound.
That's like a whisper, if somebody's whispering.
Right, exactly. So for some people, if they've got normal hearing, they're going to hear that softest sound at a much softer level than somebody who's got hearing loss. It'll take turning it up much louder before that person just does detect it. So once we get that measure of their hearing, then we're able to see, what type of hearing loss does this look like and to what degree? The degree can range. Someone can have normal hearing, they may only have a mild to moderate hearing loss, or it could be so bad as to be severe to profound in its degree.
Normal is a baseline of a general population of people, would be what normal would be.
Right, exactly.
And does each ear hear differently, or are they independently, or are they interactively connected?
So they're independent of one another, but you would expect them to hear the same unless some particular trauma has occurred to one or the other. We've had folks who have been truck drivers all their lives, and they've driven a truck with the window rolled down, and the noise from that has caused a greater hearing loss in their left ear than their right. Things you wouldn't even think about. So whenever your audiologist is testing your hearing, they should take a complete and thorough history to find out, have you been in the armed forces, gunfire, machinery, things of that nature, and that can help them figure out why there may be a difference between the ears, if there is one.
One of the interesting things you just mentioned is, and we were talking actually before you got here with some of the folks that actually run this show and makes the technical people, and the age range is important. But when I think about age and the difference in age, in my generation, it was huge speakers and bands, and you would get close to that, and some of that literally you could almost feel it shaking your hand. So that's damaged. But today, when we look at the kind of X and Y generation people and even millennials, they stick things in their ears. How is that damaging, and what is the degree of concern that you have as not only a doctor but a scientist now?
So I think that the gravest concern is duration of exposure. So if you go to one concert in your life and stand next to the speakers, that's certainly not going to help your hearing structure, but I wouldn't say it would be responsible for hearing loss several years later. If you are listening to earbuds of music turned up to the highest volume every day on your commute, while you're walking across campus, while you're going to dinner, I mean, it's everywhere and it's all the time. It's that duration. They're doing it for long periods of time. And so I would say that research has shown it's more about the extended duration that can cause the damage as opposed to these sporadic events of loudness.
So it could be frequency, and I've noticed one of the things that you mentioned, I've noticed not only the hearing aid, the buds and the earbuds, but I've also noticed recently there seems to be an uptick in actually what I call the big ear things you put on your ears. And I see a lot of folks with those in cars. I see folks walking in different locations with that. And obviously, I must make a big assumption here, but the music may be a part of that. Even our new cell phone devices will tell you if you've got something plugged in, you turn it up to it'll tell you may damage your ear if you reach a certain level of volume.
Right, absolutely. So there are actually standards in place in the workplace that don't allow folks to be exposed to certain decibel levels. That's how we measure loudness in the hearing industry over an extended period of time for that reason. So if the workplace is making sure that their employees aren't exposed, then we as consumers should be just as concerned about what we're personally exposing our hearing system to.
What kind of, when you look at treatment, we talked a little bit about the conductive part, but this nerve kind of treatment thing, is there specific things that can be done? Say, for example, if you determine as a doctor, okay, my patient has obviously a fluid issue going on, there's something happening either with sinuses or whatever. What's kind of the treatment options? Is it something mechanical? Is it something medicine related?
Right, it does depend on the source of the issue. So like we said before, some of that conductive component can be very easily fixed depending on what it is. With the middle ear bones, there's a surgical option there to go in and create movement after they've become fused together. So with your more nerve type of hearing loss, that damage has already been done, and unfortunately there's no surgical option to go back and correct a nerve-related hearing loss.
And that nerve-related hearing loss, once it's gone, it's like, that's history. I mean, it is no more. You can't replant that seed.
Currently,
you can't put oil in your ear.
Nothing to allow for the regrowth or regeneration of those hair cells. Hopefully the scientific world will come up with that option soon, but as of yet, once those hair cells have been damaged and die off, they're gone. So because of the way that the cochlea is arranged, as we discussed earlier, the hair cells that are responsible for your high-pitch hearing, those are the ones that are hit first by sound. So those are typically the ones that die off first. So when people say, I've got high-pitch hearing loss, I'm not surprised because those are the hair cells that get the brunt of the damage, and those would be the ones to die off first.
But I think the thing that strikes me too, I recall reading that tendonitis is another issue, and does that relate to folks that may have something called TMJ, where they've had the biting sensation at night? Maybe their dentist would recommend an appliance. Does the way we move here, is there connectivity issues there?
It can. Anytime you're putting pressure on your system that connects to your ear, there can be side effects. But honestly, when people report ringing or tinnitus, it's most often due to some nerve type of damage or nerve hearing loss. Their brain has lost that sense of sound because those hair cells are gone, and it's had to make up its own source of sound in that frequency or pitch range. So that's why most often people report this ringing to be a high-pitched sound. Again, it goes back to what we just discussed. They probably have the most hearing loss in their high-pitch range. So it's generally a correlation between the hearing loss and the ringing.
Is it normal during the aging process for this kind of thing to happen as far as hearing loss? I mean, I guess the question would be, should folks as they age expect that to happen as they do other body functions?
Absolutely. I would say that as you reach 50 and beyond, that you can certainly start to pay attention, because it may not be very obvious, but oftentimes people will begin by saying, I can hear, but I can't understand. And that's a sure sign that there's probably some high-pitch hearing loss or other type of hearing loss going on.
And that's oftentimes people will say in different settings.
Noisy.
For example, exactly, if it's a room and there's a lot of people in it, they can't focus in on what you're saying.
Right.
Whereas maybe other people driving and you're in a vehicle, or if you're having trouble, and I'm picking this up from some of the research, but it's like if you're having trouble hearing and somebody's on a certain side of you and you move them to another side, that would be indicative of maybe a certain ear having a problem.
Right, absolutely, absolutely.
So we're going to go to another break. Then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about this company called Med-EL, of which is neatly put on your shirt, and we'll discuss that in more detail. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. We're talking about hearing. We're coming up on our last break, or last segment, as we're talking with Dr. Meredith Hill to try to get folks to understand that they may need to get checked. We'll be back in a moment.
Give me a home where no burglar can roam, where my kids and their pets safely play. With security by star, I can check in from afar, hit the lights, lock the door, night or day.
Really? Yeah, I can see my cameras, switch the lights, lock the doors, set the alarm, all from my phone.
Their prices are right, my home's locked up tight, Star Security makes me feel great.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I'm talking to Dr. Meredith Hill today, doctor of audiology, started out with linguistics, a Sampson County girl. We love to have people that come back after going off to different places and doing very well. Left private practice and went into, I kind of call it a research scientist kind of thing. Of course, all medicine is science research. But you're working with a company called Med-EL, a global technology company that researches in the field of hearing loss and develops and manufactures various kinds of implants and devices to allow people to hear, in some cases, as they did when they were 16.
Right.
And that is phenomenal.
Right.
Tell us where you are and what some of those cochlear implants and how they've been doing and what the practical application is revealing.
Sure. So Med-EL is the medical electronics company, and as you said, they specialize in implantable solutions for hearing loss. So they were started out of Austria by our founders and CEO, husband and wife, and we've grown. We are worldwide. Currently, headquarters are in Durham, in RTP, Research Triangle Park, which is where I work. I support all of our devices by phone, email, etc. If patients or audiologists practicing in the field are using our device, I provide technology support. And these devices are amazing and incredible. When you consider cochlear implants, they are like tiny computers, and they've come a long way. They were at one point just single channel, so the most basic of technology that you can imagine, and people did well to just hear a sound. But at this point, as you referenced, people can not just hear sounds, but they can understand and communicate with the help of these devices.
So tell us how, when you get to that point, and we'll just make a quick observation. You've done the homework and done the research, and you've analyzed, and all of a sudden somebody is a patient that cochlear implants can help.
Right.
What should they expect? How trouble-free is it? How much is involved? How much of that cost is recognized as an insurance cost, and how much, and I know you can't say in specific because there are different insurance companies,
right?
But we're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars people could hear, could actually put forward to just be able to hear.
Right.
And once they are able to hear again like they did when they were 16, it's kind of hard probably to take it away, is it not?
Right, absolutely. So for people who have that sensory neural or nerve damage hearing loss, there comes a time where we would expect they would benefit from hearing aids, a different type of technology, and after a certain point, if that nerve damage continues, the hearing aid may no longer help. It's that busted speaker analogy that we gave earlier. You can continue to turn the volume up via the hearing aid, but that understanding component is just lost. So at that point, it's typically when people are suffering from the severe to profound degree of hearing loss that they need to consider the next step, which is cochlear implants. So a cochlear implant is what it sounds like. It's a surgically implanted device. They would have to go in through behind the ear, open up the skin, and dig through the bone by drilling. And our cochlea is bone, so they have to drill a hole so that they can insert a very tiny electrode array. And I have an example of what that is. The actual implant gets seated behind the ear, and this lead wire or this lead electrode is what gets curved, and these surgeons are something else to be able.
That's under the skin?
Under the skin, exactly. This actually goes into the bone. So if you can imagine something like this having to travel through those turns of the cochlea, these surgeons are really doing a magnificent work.
And this is microscopic.
Microscopic on that level. So this electrode lead has electrodes that help with different pitch perceptions. So like we discussed with the cochlea, the hair cells are supposed to be responsible for that.
I'm remembering that piano key thing.
Exactly. The electrode is now taking place of the damaged structure. So hopefully whenever the patients have their external part put on, that usually happens a month after the surgery to allow for healing, then the connection between the two devices allows them sound, and over time they'll regain that pitch understanding, or that the loudness levels and the low to high pitch perceptions. So the external parts do look like larger hearing aids, to be quite honest, but they're much more sophisticated. So they have the processing that takes place when the sound comes in, and then it has to send that signal and make it an electrical signal, because the electrode is an electronic type of hearing. So whenever a patient wears the external part, they have a magnet that aligns with the magnet that is under their skin, and that's how the communication occurs.
So when we look at that, and I know there's folks out there listening that may be candidates for this, but they've got to go through the diagnostic part. The first concern is going to be, I almost would be willing to bet 100% on this, is going to be a cosmetic issue.
Right. So there are different models of our processor that are available. We actually have one that is what we call a single unit, and it's just like what it sounds. It's one part. It's maybe, the size of a silver dollar, and it can fit right on the implant site. We have patients that wear it under their hair, and you're none the wiser. So we have different options for our external part, but sure, that's still a concern, is that people will be able to see and know that they have some type of hearing impairment. Honestly though, the way that technology is advancing, people have things on their ears all the time, whether that's Bluetooth or cell phone or earbuds or something. So we're hoping that by making these devices that are a little more user-friendly and aesthetically pleasing, that people won't even think twice when they see it.
Well, 2 quick questions I want to try to get in before we run out of time here.
Sure.
Is one deals with this, what do we see the future? What, from where you are looking at the scientific research you're doing and the company you're working with, what does the future look like for these kinds of devices, and how microscopic can we get?
So I'm hoping that one day we will have a fully implantable hearing device, and when you consider that the implant does get placed under the skin, but that it's no good without its external component, then a fully implantable device, meaning no external part required to still stimulate the hearing nerve, I think that would be great.
That would be the home run.
That would be the home run. You definitely never know that someone had a hearing impairment if they have something that's fully implanted.
Is that realistic, or how close, if you had to say, just hypothetically, how close are we to reaching that point that could be there? Because I can only imagine, I mean, with the science and capabilities we've got, I know you guys are pushing the envelope.
Yeah, so we're getting smaller and smaller in our technology, so I would hope that it would come in my lifetime. We do have some considerations such as battery life, how would you power such a device, and things of that nature, but we have some of the best minds, some of the best engineers over in Austria working on things all the time, so hopefully it's something that we see.
Well, and we see some of that technology with cardiovascular issues where folks have implanted devices and those kinds of things. So what would be your advice as we're talking today to folks that are out there and they've heard the show? What's the next step? I mean, there's a lot of folks out there, a lot of people sell different devices. You have put a lot of academic credentials behind your name and a lot of research to do this. What do you say to folks if they have a problem? Where should they go?
I absolutely think that they need to start by having their hearing tested, find your audiologist, and get a comprehensive diagnostic exam, and that will tell you the full depth and breadth of your hearing loss, the degree, the type, the treatment options, how that may progress over time and what you need to expect. And then beyond that, seek out those treatment options. So whether that is a hearing aid, or if you're progressed beyond what a hearing aid could help, seeking out the cochlear implant. Unfortunately, a lot of folks continue to spend more and more money on hearing aids, and they're not ready to take that next step to a cochlear implant. They're essentially wasting money when they really need to consider that beyond the point of help from a hearing aid, their only other option would be the cochlear implant. So getting to a professional that can diagnose and treat that, and then from there refer you on to someone who may be a more specialized professional.
And I think the other thing too, as in some of the reading I've done, is this idea of denial is simply not an option, because it's going to continue and you can relate it to any other kind of disease, whether it's cardiovascular or whatever. If you're having pains in your chest radiating down your arm, I mean, you immediately get help. But oftentimes with hearing, you don't. And those are the kinds of things that we're encouraging folks, get that test. Then you can make a decision as to whether to do anything or not do anything. So I guess as we kind of come to the end of the show, I want to thank you again for being here. And I'm recalling as we go to closure here, the commercial, I think it was an old Verizon commercial, said, "Can you hear me now?"
Oh yeah.
And basically that's what we're about, and that's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Any last minute comment?
Thank you for having me. It's always good to be home.
Always good to have you around. It's always good to see you, and I want to thank you for your success and putting the time in to do what you're doing and continue this research.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking with Dr. Meredith Boyette Hill. So the show today has been about hearing. As you send comments or questions, you can go to the website www.mdel.com/US for more information from the organization she works with. And as always, we look forward to seeing you again next week on the radio, and may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.